Sainsbury! Sainsbury! Sainsbury!
Richard Bigley. Still Richard Bigley. Always Richard Bigley.
Warning, this podcast contains violence, sexuality, gore, and other horrible and disturbing things. Listener discretion is advised. Also, the hosts of this venture are ignorant dipshits, so please do not take anything they say as fact. And enjoy the show.
Now, are you sitting comfortably? Good. Then we'll begin.
Today we had 15 homicides and 63 violent crimes, as if that's the way it's supposed to be.
It is our basic human right to be fuck-up.
A second plane now has crashed into the other tower of the World Trade Center.
Putting chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay.
The defendant shall be incarcerated for the rest of her natural life with no possibility of parole.
You are not machines. You are not cattle. You are men.
We were somewhere around Barstow, on the edge of the desert, when the drugs began to take hold.
Occultae Veritatis.
So, this was the first episode that we recorded during our quarantine. And we forgot, or through technical difficulties forgot, I'm not sure what exactly happened, but we cut off the intro and halfway through the What's Your Poison? And, you know, I want to blame it on technical difficulties, but I think it's so fitting that this is the 420 episode. You know, we start out from a fog. Also, we go into cannabis as kind of just a plant in this episode. We're going to have different episodes covering the medicinal uses surrounding it, because that's a whole episode on its own. Also, an episode focusing on the drug war. So this is about the plant of cannabis itself. Enjoy.
Hey, young America, we need to talk. You may think this is uncool. You may even think it is bogus. But I want to tell you about something that has everyone buzzing. Something that concerns mature boys and girls just like you. Weed, grass, ganja, joint, doobie, do, chronic, ace, lobo, loco, love boat, bud, buddha, blunt, pot, pat, pin, chiba, 420, and hashish, or hash for short. No matter what you call it, no matter what hip street lift it's referred to by, it all comes from the same stash. It's all marijuana. You may have heard of it. You may have seen someone smoking it, like those burnout bohemians or that crazy-eyed custodian at your school. You may have taken a toke or two. But do you know the whole story? Do you know the blunt truth?
Cannabis is a flowering plant in the family Cannabiaceae. This family also contains humulus, which is also known as hops, which is one of the core ingredients of beer, so go figure. Same family of plants, both a thing for beer and cannabis. Now, so the basic parts of the cannabis plant, the stem. So this is the main support structure of the plant. It transports fluids, nutrients, and minerals from the soil to the rest of the plant, and it provides a foundation for the fan leaves to grow from. And also it provides a tough foundation when you grow heavy nugs, so you need that stem strength to hold up those heavy colas. Next are the fan leaves. So these are the working leaves of the marijuana plant. These are the leaves that are catching the light, doing the photosynthesis thing, feeding all the little parts of the plant, all the nutrients they need from the photosynthesis, and providing the plant with energy. So these are the big classic ones that you see on t-shirts and beanies and like on logos everywhere. Those are the classic fan leaves. Depending on if the plant is a male or a female, it'll either have stigmas or pistils. Stigmas are thin hairs that extends from the branch of the female marijuana plant, and they're designed to catch pollen on top of them. They're kind of sticky. They're commonly confused with pistils, but they're not the same. Knowing how to identify stigmas is an important part of growing weed because you want the female plant if you want to get high, because that's the plant that has the cannabinoids that have the active ingredient inside of it. Yeah, the pistil is the primary piece of the female's flower's reproductive system, and it comprises a single ovule, which is like an ovary, and 2 protruding stigmas. So that's where the stigma comes from. So when they catch the pollen from the male plant, they draw the pollen down into the ovule, and it grows into a seed just like a baby in a womb grows. But hopefully you don't do that, because if you leave your female plants unfertilized, then you get the THC and the nugs that are smokable that will produce the psychedelic effects. The next part is sugar leaves. So as opposed to the big fan leaves that catch sunlight, sugar leaves are small leaves found throughout the cannabis's colas. They kind of wrap around the buds and are typically trimmed off the flower after harvest. Sometimes they're left in. They're called sugar leaves because all the little trichomes, the little dewy, crystally bits of hardened THC chemical, are covered all around these leaves, so they kind of look sugar-covered. Sugar leaf trim can be used to make edibles or concentrates, or it can also be smoked as well. There's a good amount of THC in those sugar leaves anyway. So what am I talking about trichomes? So trichomes are tiny, almost microscopic hair-like appendages found on the cannabis plant. They start to produce these oils that harden on top of these little hairs. And these oils contain the flavonoids, so what a cannabis smoke tastes like, the cannabinoids, so THC and CBD, and the terpenes, like all the little compounds found within a cannabis plant that produce its whole myriad of effects.
The chemicals in cannabis interact with your endocannabinoid system when you smoke or ingest it. The first is THC. Everybody knows THC, or tetrahydrocannabinol. It causes the psychoactive effects in your brain. Some effects include altered perception, euphoria, heightened sensation, and even paranoia. The next chemical is CBD, or cannabidiol. Similar to THC in molecular structure, CBD has many medicinal properties. CBD has anti-anemic, anti-convulsant, antipsychotic, anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, anti-tumoral, and antidepressant properties when ingested. Another lesser-known group of chemicals in cannabis are terpenes. Many terpenes are aromatic carbons and are associated with smells and flavors. Terpenes produce smells in lemons, mints, and many other pungent plants. In terms of cannabis, they add many distinctive flavors such as berry, mint, citrus, and pine.
Yeah, and the chemical compounds that give the cannabis plant, like, its name and its effects are all in those trichomes. So without the trichomes, you wouldn't have, like, the marijuana high. The cola is the main part of the flower. It's the end part of the female plant stem, and it consists of many tiny floral structures. In a mature female plant that hasn't been fertilized, these buds start to grow and swell and build in plant material, and the trichomes start to grow in plant material and grow along these colas, and that's when you get the huge amount of these buds along these stems. There's a number of species of cannabis, but it's highly disputed. Some people say that there's just one strain, and it's sativa, cannabis sativa, and that all 3 strains can be considered like a sub-strain of it. So every cannabis plant is like a sativa plant, and the sub-strains are sativa and indica, and yeah. There's an
Ruderalis.
Yeah, ruderalis, and there's another one where all 3 of them are separate families. There's one where the ruderalis and indica are grouped together, but sativa is in its own family. And there's a bunch of different beliefs about how these plants should be grouped like in a taxonomy system. But there's a lot of, I guess, clout put into the names indica and sativa. So I just want to emphasize that the science is not settled on these families. The sativa and the indica and like the hybrid that you'll see in the smoke shops is pretty irrelevant, actually. So indica is colloquially linked to relaxation, sativa to high and more energy. And when you go into a smoke shop or a website or whatever, you'll often find the 3 options listed: sativa, indica, and hybrids. People tend to classify these by how they feel after taking it. So they smoke something and they say this feels like an indica, or this feels like a sativa, or this feels like a blend of the two. Like stoner taxonomy. But how the plant is labeled before it's smoked can often add bias. And just like, most people know somebody that has drunken like non-alcoholic wine or beer and has acted drunk afterwards, like kind of that like placebo effect drunk. And I think the same thing can happen when you're expecting a sativa feel. You might feel a sativa feel, but stoner taxonomy is not really accurate. Like, it's based off the experiences of these people who may be biased by the labels put in front of them. You know, they buy a strain, the person at the counter tells them what they're going to feel, the website tells them what they're going to feel, and then they kind of like smoke it and they might fall into that. When the plants are broken down with a more scientific methodological approach, there's not much differences that are found. In terms of indica and sativa, a study in 2015 had a whole bunch of different strains, 81 samples of different strains of weed, both from sativa, hybrid, and indica, tested, and they compared their genetics. So how similar and how different were the genetics? And they figured if there's a real difference between how sativas are and how indicas are, then their genetics should show a significant difference. But when they compared the two, they didn't see that much of a significant difference. Like, the divide between indica and sativa may not be as emphasized and as, like, a pick-your-own dream experience kind of thing as smoke shops and marketing may lead to believe. Most often, like, every strain is its own little experience, and you shouldn't go by, like, the standards of what a sativa is supposed to be or what an indica is supposed to be, because at the end of the day, like, those things are fairly irrelevant and not very well studied. Like, there's no review board to make sure your strawberry cough strain acts and feels like a strawberry cough strain. You know, people buy it and smoke it, and they don't report to the review board that, like, hey, I didn't feel what was on your list of things. So it's kind of, like, hard to have that feedback to correct itself. Yeah, does that make sense?
Data point of 1, but I did give a friend once something that I mislabeled or misremembered as an indica. And so he smoked it and immediately, like, fell into couch, like indica is supposed to do, quote unquote. And later I was Googling and went, oh, actually it's like a really strong sativa, so it should be empowering. He's like, no, you must have that wrong. It has to be an indica because I'm so, bacon in the couch. And it's like, no, I don't know.
Yeah. I think people can really think themselves into stuff. And I think, yeah, and depending on, like, what state they're in when they start smoking, whether they're tired or awake or what time of day it was, it can also, like, associate with, like, what the strain does.
The most important question I think we need to ask ourselves is, how do we sign up for that research?
No kidding, eh?
Right?
Yeah, one of my favorite topics, debunking this indica sativa myth, because it is a problem when people are using these names to really find predictability and consistency in their effects, and then they don't get it. That is inexcusable, in my opinion, because we do have something else to look for, which is the cannabinoids and the terpenes. And so, for those who are unfamiliar, indica and sativa, they are terms that, when they were originally created, they were defined by the way that the plant grew. And so they only talk about plant morphology. Indica growing really short and bushy, having broader leaves, having denser flowers. Sativa growing really tall and skinny, having loose flowers, skinny leaves. And then there's also this hybrid classification when the sativa and indica have been crossed. And so you have a plant with that mixed morphology. Maybe it's medium height, maybe it has broad leaves, but loose flowers, whatever it may be. At no point when these terms were created, and they were created in the 1700s by fathers of modern taxonomy, at no point did these philosophers, did these kind of new scientists smoke or consume this sativa or indica and make note of like, whoa, I'm feeling really energized off this sativa, or, oh man, I'm totally into couch from this indica. There's no account of that. And so to be in this place now where the industry has kind of adopted these terms to correlate to consistent experience is nonsensical. It doesn't make sense. They're two completely different definitions. Plant morphology, the way that a plant grows, does not determine the way it's going to make you feel. And even at one point, if at one point in history these plants did correlate to consistent experience, they don't anymore. And that is because everything on the market currently is a genetic hybrid. Everything has been crossed so many times that we are now left with this really incredibly diverse gene pool within cannabis, which is awesome. It makes for really strong plants. And that's because we are now coming out of this century-long prohibition where all of the breeding that was done, I mean, there was no scientific legitimacy with it.
So where did cannabis come from? So it likely emerged in Central to Southern Asia. We don't know exactly where. It's not really exactly known. Just when they map the genetics back, they come to a general area. They probably grew in really wet places near water bodies, kind of swampy areas. And this type of environment was also frequently chosen as a temporary settlement by human nomadic groups nearby a water source. That's where animals are. That's where resources are. That's where berries grew. That's where a lot of things can be found. So it's just by coincidence that kind of like early nomadic humans and cannabis plants kind of occupied the same areas. And cannabis species in the wild had a very weedy attitude. They grew in a lot of places. Like the word weed is very appropriate because these plants grow fairly well in a lot of environments. They may not produce like dank, like hard-hitting nugs like in every environment, but the plant will survive and breed in a variety of environments. Cannabis is a flowering plant. Most flowering plants, 95% of them, have both male and female reproductive structures. But the remaining 5% of flowering plants have structures that separate the two. So they have flowers that are either male or either female. Cannabis is even a subtype of one of those because there are some plants under that type of flowering that have separate male and female flowers that have it on the same plant. But cannabis has it on different plants. You have male plants and female plants. A very rare thing in the flower world. Like if cannabis wasn't like this or hasn't been like bred to be more like this, then we would have seed-filled nugs that would be very hard to smoke and probably wouldn't be very convenient. We may not have adopted it as quickly. So cannabis is wind-pollinated, so the male plants will grow their little pollen sacs, and a breeze of wind will hit, and those little pollens will travel a long ways, sometimes miles at a time, and land on the little female reproductive parts to produce little baby cannabis. In cannabis production for recreational use, where you want that THC, males aren't really used for anything besides making new babies or breeding.
Fair. That definitely sounds fair.
There are hermaphroditic plants that have male and female sex organs, but they're mostly formed if the seed is very stressed during its growth cycle. So the majority of marijuana plants are either male or either female. But under great stress conditions, they can become hermaphroditic with both male and female flowers. Man and plant. So mankind and weed have been working together for a long time. Hemp has been used as a source of textiles, as an edible plant, and as a medicinal medicine, as well as a psychoactive medicine for many, many years. Like, before writing was invented, humans were probably interacting with cannabis. In recent times, hemp fibers have been used to produce bioplastic, antibacterial agents, and what's moreover, the trichomes, the ones that produce the THC, the CBD, like all those little cannabinoids that produce the effects, those are being studied to produce other types of chemicals. They're found to be very effective little factories at putting together these psychoactive chemicals. So scientists think they may be able to learn from these trichomes to produce little chemical factories of their own. The oldest written record of cannabis usage is Greek historian Herodotus' reference to Scythians taking cannabis steam baths. He said, the Scythians, as I said, take some of this hemp seed and, creeping under felt coverings, throw it upon the red-hot stones. Immediately it smokes and gives out such a vapor as no Greek vapor bath can exceed. The Scythians, delighted, shout for joy. So the Scythians apparently were throwing seeds and leaves upon these fires that produced a smoke, and they were filled with joy. Humans cultivating hemp, so not only using hemp, but cultivating it, goes all the way back to 90 AD with a Greek botanist. It was passed from botanist to physician to physician, made it through the Renaissance, survived up to the 18th century, was studied and bred, and made it up till today. Today we have so many different uses for cannabis. For industry, we use the soft fiber from the stem to produce these hemp fibers. These are hypoallergenic and very strong, and also very cheap to produce. It can also be used to produce paper and a whole bunch of different products. Medical use. Medical cannabis and its cannabinoid counterparts can be used to treat disease or treat symptoms. It can be used to reduce nausea and vomiting during chemotherapy, to improve appetite in people with appetite suppression symptoms. It can be used to treat chronic pain and muscle spasms. And it's under preliminary research for their potential to affect stroked victims regain control over their bodies. And of course, recreational use. The psychoactive effects of cannabis are known throughout the world.
Yeah, what up, YouTube? What up? Jolioli coming at you for Custom Grow 420. This 18-over channel design for cannabis patients and adults. Alright, man, in this one, the Lung Buster, 30 inches of doom. Let's get it. We're not gonna waste any time here. We got some Thunderfuck loaded up. 2.5 footer. The Lung Buster. It's glass on glass. Can barely light this bad boy. The Lung Buster. Cheers. Beastie.
What do you guys feel when you smoke cannabis? Or I guess, what kind of feel are you looking for when you use a cannabis product?
I like the body high. I don't like a brain high.
Yeah, I like the where your muscles like just kind of let go, and you can just relax, and calm down and just deal,
Yeah. Yeah. I like to still be able to like think and everything. I don't like to just be sucked into that like high hole, when you hotbox someone's car and it's like too much and you just spend an hour and a half being too high and wishing you weren't high. I don't like that.
That's my problem with usually like smoking pot, and the reason I don't do it with like recording this or doing Dungeons and Dragons or whatever is because I just turn into a puddle of stupid.
Exactly, me too. That's why I try not to smoke. Like, I don't smoke pot like ever.
Yeah, so it's like I'll take a little, a little of it, and then I'll be dead for an hour, and it's like great, awesome. I can't talk or interact with people very well, and I just kind of giggle a lot. Great, but you have that nice body high, you feel kind of tingly, you get good, everything's nice.
No, yeah, I guess I use it for sleeping. Like when I really can't sleep, I smoke what I think. I guess like I follow under the indica sativa thing too. Like I fall victim to the marketing as well. So I take a really good indica and I try and I guess hopefully it makes me sleepy enough or quiets my mind enough that I can drift off. Otherwise, I use marijuana to like enhance media and experiences. Like if I'm playing like a really cool video game with a lot of like exploration involved in it or something like that, like I use weed to like get into that headspace, get into that world. And same with playing D&D. It kind of lets me escape and use my imagination a little more. So I would say I enjoy the head high for that kind of stuff.
Do you think that the head high versus the body high is an entirely psychosomatic thing, that you may induce one or the other, just kind of depending on what you want to do?
I think that's totally a possibility.
Yeah. Oh, probably.
So we
definitely
talked a little bit in the last episode or a different episode about how there's a terpene in mangoes called myrcene, which actually like makes your cannabinoid receptors more easily accept the THC. And the different terpenes in THC or in marijuana, like they come in different amounts. There's myrcene, there's all kinds of them in there. So just the different amounts of each one in there could definitely affect the way that high hits you too. Something really, really high in myrcene might just make you super high, but something higher in pinene might have a different effect.
Like the kings of the show that everybody talks about are CBD and THC, but like Arthur said, I think there's 100 or so, probably even more than that, of these terpenes that have all their own little effects and can be in their own little concentration. So you see that the indica sativa kind of differentiation kind of becomes meaningless when you add the effects of all these terpenes after a while. Like it may be a good general rule of thumb, but it can't be depended upon. And I think it might be psychosomatic, like you said, Richard. I don't think it's totally psychosomatic, but I think it definitely has potential to be like psychosomatic, because I think sometimes I want like to omni-focus on like a cool new video game or something like that. So I smoke a bunch of weed to get omni-focused. And I think that might be like a self-fulfilling prophecy kind of thing.
The hard thing I find with doing any kind of like research on weed is, since at least in Canada it's only been legalized for so long, and all across the world it's still not legal at all. You get all this weird stoner culture behind it, where you get the things like the indica sativa dichotomy, where these two things do these different things because there's never been research on it because it's been illegal for so long. So, for every time you find that, myrcene is this chemical that does this and this and this, we've scientifically proven it, you also get things like, would you look at that? Linalool will cure cancer. And it's like, that's not science anymore. That's, stoner science.
Right.
Yeah, and without a proper, like, scientific method and, like, peer review process and all that, like, all these claims being made can like propagate and become quote unquote knowledge before anybody has a chance to like double check them or make sure they're correct. So yeah, I see how it can be totally abused to kind of set up kind of this false stoner logic of like what cannabis is and what it does and stuff like that.
Well, and I mean, think of the, due to prohibition, the amount of medical knowledge in addition to the scientific knowledge that we lack, that we could have gained, and had it not been prohibited for so long, we could have done all these studies all this time, and we would have had a much more thorough understanding of the plant and its effects, and how different chemicals in the makeup of the plant affect different psychoactive effects or medicinal effects with it.
Well, I posted a link, and maybe we can get this in some show notes somewhere or disseminate it somehow. But it's a well-known video of a man with Parkinson's disease. So he's barely able to sit normally. Like, he just kind of moves and twitches and can't control his body, using CBD oil for the first time. And after, I can't remember how many minutes, but it's not very long, only 15 minutes, he just stretches out on this couch and lays back and sits up, and he's just calm and collected, and he's not twitching anymore. He's not moving erratically anymore. And it's one of those, like, is that psychosomatic? Well, if it's psychosomatic, it certainly works, but that's something we should be looking into more.
Yeah.
Well, it makes me think of psilocybin mushrooms, for example, where, there's a lot we just simply do not know because they've been prohibited, and no one's really been able to study the effects with any sort of, thorough, peer-reviewed, accurate, methodology.
Yeah, and again, kind of the same thing is happening kind of in like psilocybin like circles too, where all these theories and kind of like thoughts and like running strategies and like thoughts about what the plant does and how it behaves are in that community, but like a lot of it, since it hasn't been like properly studied, is kind of guesswork. Like it could be accurate or maybe it's not, and it seems to do a lot of good for a lot of people, but we don't have any actual evidence to point towards, like not any. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's like guerrilla therapies going on with all kinds of substances, from MDMA trials to ketamine trials, and those are things that are being done in a scientific way. But like using these psychoactive compounds, and psychoactive is anything from coffee to cocaine, using these compounds to do therapies is something that people are doing right now in the world. But there's no, people look at it and say, well, it can't be real because there's no double-blinded studies, there's no science backing it, there's no whatever. But these people are recovering and feeling better and doing something. So, at least my hope, if I can get a little, soapboxy here, is that with marijuana being legalized, we can start to move into legalization of psilocybin and possibly LSD and all kinds of other things.
It was interesting. I'd watched a documentary or whatever, and I mean, when I watch it, you kind of take it with a bit of a grain of salt too. But it's called Dosed, and I guess this guy treats his friend. I guess she's in a real tough spot, and she's, I guess an opioid addict, and they treat her opioid addiction using microdosing of psilocybin. And I don't know, she seems to think that it had a positive effect and helped her deal with her addiction. And and it's something that should be studied more, but without it, it's kind of left into folklore and just sort of guessing and kind of out of the hands of like the scientific medical community.
Yeah, that's like, you can cut this if you want, but like dosedmovie.com, it is an excellent thing to watch, because it is entirely, like you say, about someone with an opiate addiction being, I don't want to say cured because that's too strong a word, but helped so much by psychoactive compounds, including ayahuasca being the big one, or iboga, I think it was.
Iboga, yeah.
Yeah. You should, if you have the chance, listeners out there, if you have the chance to watch Dosed, watch it. It's at very least a good movie. A little heart-wrenching.
Yeah, 100%. And it even has some comedic relief moments.
It sure does.
I haven't seen it yet. That's definitely on my list, though.
Next time it comes to the Broadway.
Oh, whenever this whole thing is over. There's supposed to be a reshowing this month, but I think that's been canceled. Yeah.
I sure hope so. You can actually rent it right now for $7.03 Canadian. So.
Oh, so the different types, I guess the different ways you can consume cannabis and all the different ways you can consume it. Main way of consuming it, the way most people consume it, is by burning it. You burn the leaf, you burn the flower, you burn the sugar leaves, you burn the little trichomes, and that releases part of the THC, which is absorbed by your lungs. So you can do this through hand pipes. So hand pipes are little pipes that don't have any water component. They usually have 3 holes. One hole is right below where you put the cannabis. One hole is off on some other part, and that's used to restrict and introduce air depending on how quick you want the cannabis to burn. And one hole is where you put your mouth. And you basically plug one hole, light the flame, suck in, and the cannabis will start burning. And when you want more fresh air, you let your finger off the hole, and more fresh air comes in that other hole. It's very simple. You can even make one out of a pop can,
2-liter pop bottles.
Oh, yeah.
Best.
Apple pipes.
Oh yeah, apple pipes. Yeah.
I have never used any of these contraptions.
What? I'm gonna make you an apple.
Are there apples in the fridge?
No.
Okay.
Do you have
it's
a
exactly as it
bottle?
sounds.
I am such a terrible stoner because I have used a bong exactly one time, and I was out for a full day.
All right, water pipes. So water pipes come in slightly different variations, not limited to bongs and bubblers, also hookahs to some degree. So basically the design on these is you light the flower, and before the smoke travels to your lungs, it goes through the water. We don't know whether or not running it through water removes a lot of the toxins in the smoke significantly. It could just be traveling through the water without releasing much of the compounds inside of it, and you could be getting basically the same thing to your lungs. Or it could be improving things. We really don't have enough studies to confirm it. It's uncertain as of now. Arguably, one of the most popular methods is just using papers. Using joints or blunts. Joints are cannabis rolled in a rolling paper, which I just learned to roll a couple months ago in a little machine on this show.
You did. I remember that.
And blunts are cannabis rolled in cigar papers made from the tobacco plant and usually contain nicotine. What's a spliff? Is a spliff different?
No, I think a spliff is just I think
it's another slang.
Left-handed cigarettes.
Yeah.
Next up are vaporizers. So vaporizers have been shown to reduce the number of toxins going into your lungs because instead of completely burning the plant, it instead introduces it just a very high heat, enough to kind of melt the trichomes and boil off the chemicals in the trichomes without igniting the plant itself. It kind of like...
What is a toxin and everything is a chemical? That all sounds like a bunch of bullshit to me. Sorry.
No, that's very fair. I guess the things that you don't want in your lungs, such as tar, such as like different what are the things that produce cancer? What are they called?
Well, there's all kinds of like burning plant matter. Like you don't want to absorb burning plant matter, right?
Yeah,
carcinogens.
Like consuming the soot on your barbecue, it introduces carcinogens into your body, which is known to like increase your chances of cancer. Like just even consuming that amount of burnt stuff. Like a lot of health organizations like encourage people not to burn their food because it introduces carcinogens to your body, and you're introducing like a burnt plant compound into your body. And so it introduces carcinogens. In addition, it introduces tar, which can coat your lungs, and different types of resins, which contain a lot of THC, but aren't really good when they're deep inside your lungs. Your lungs can't extract the THC out of that resin, and it really just kind of damages the air sacs inside of your lungs.
How do you get tar from marijuana?
When you smoke...
That was only like cigarettes.
You get tar from cigarettes as well. Like any burning plant matter really will carry tar on it. It's kind of like, I think tar and soot are kind of like the same thing. Like it's just kind of like tiny little particles carried along by the smoke that deposit themselves on the walls of whatever they come into contact with, and they form this kind of inky black stuff over time.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
The definition, according to Wikipedia, says tar is the common name for the resinous, partially combusted particulate matter made by burning of tobacco and other plant material in the act of smoking. So yeah, it's just any little bits of ash and dust that get resin together and stick to your lungs.
Yeah, and
got it. Sorry, I'm like I got.
Oh yeah, and like it's very important that you pointed that out, because when I say like chemicals and toxins and stuff like that, like I'm speaking like as a skeptic, like I'm talking about like actual toxins and like harmful chemicals. But it sounds like I'm speaking like like an anti-vaxxer or something like that, you know?
Well, that's where my brain automatically goes when you're like, oh, those bad chemicals, and, oh, those toxins.
So a vaporizer, when you vaporize a cannabis plant, it doesn't burn it. So tar is produced and the carcinogens are produced when the plant is combusted through burning. But vaporization is really it's almost like boiling or steaming the cannabis plant. So it extracts the THC without combusting it, without setting it on fire. And that greatly reduces the amount of tar and carcinogens in the smoke. So they don't deposit in your lungs as readily. So vaporizers are often chosen a lot by like chronic everyday smokers, at least to replace some of their daily puffs, just to reduce the amount of carcinogens and tar going into their lungs. If you want to get even more serious and want to eliminate any lung activity whatsoever, you can just go straight to the stomach. There are a whole bunch of different ways you can eat cannabis. Tinctures are liquid cannabis extracts used by consumers looking for dosage control and fast-acting effects. Most often, alcohol or vinegar or glycerol can be used to dissolve the THC into the substrate, and usually it just takes 3 or 4 drops of a properly strengthened tincture to get someone high. So you can carry like a little bottle with a little stopper in it with a little tincture of cannabis along with you, and you don't even have to involve your lungs to get high off that. Oils. So ingestible oils are a happy medium between edibles and concentrates. They are swallowed and digested like an infused product, but often have the consistency of oil. So cannabis can be suspended in all kinds of different fat-based oils, because THC and other cannabinoids are fat soluble. So when you put cannabis in heat with the oil, the cannabinoids and the THC will travel from the plant to the oil, and then you can get high off eating the oil. Yeah, so edibles can be baked into products like candy or brownies or cookies or stuff like that, or they can just be suspended in butter and oil and used to cook when you want. Like if you want to make some scrambled eggs with some like THC butter and have yourself like a wake and bake scrambled egg morning, like that's an option you can take. Lastly, I'm sure there's more, but the last one I'm going to talk about are topicals. Basically, thick oil has been decarbonated, and basically all you need to know about decarbylation is it makes THC accessible to your body, so it can be absorbed through your skin. It doesn't have to be digested or put into the bloodstream. It can just be absorbed by your skin and used by your body immediately. Decarboxylated. Yes. Topical effects differ from other medicating methods. Usually you don't get high off a topical. It doesn't really reach the brain, but it can have local effects on wherever you put it on. It can reduce like itchiness, it can reduce chronic pain, it can reduce soreness, it can reduce muscle aches, all kinds of stuff. Alrighty, lastly, since me and Richard Bigley are growing plants, I thought we'd talk a little bit about that. How far have your plants come along, Richard? And like, I guess, what was your process growing them so far?
This was my first time ever, and I don't read instructions or directions or anything like that. And so this was just sort of an experiment, a learning process, just to see if I can well, not just cannabis, but just keep a plant alive long enough to like do something with it. And yeah, it's I don't know, started out as seeds. I took the seeds and wrapped them in a paper towel that I kept wet, and then they sprouted, planted them well, see, my first mistake was that I put both seeds in the same pot and was like, yeah, whatever, I'll just let them grow. And then, they start to grow, and then like one just became this massive giant, and the other one like has been perpetually struggling. And now the root systems are so complex and intertwined that, there's really nothing I can do. I don't think I could remove one without damaging the other.
They're forever destined to be.
So that's right. They're twins forever, except one just like towers over the other one and sucks up all the nutrients and sunlight and everything.
How long do you figure until you harvest?
Well, I was thinking about it recently. Like, the plant is starting to look a little aged. So there's one nice, healthy-looking offshoot, and I'm thinking next time I like venture out into public for something important and necessary, I may also pick up some sort of rooting compound and see if I can clone it and keep going. But the rest of it's looking pretty aged and perhaps ready to harvest.
Is Sage still here?
Yeah, she's mute.
I'm mute, you assholes.
That didn't sound mute at all. That sounded almost loud.
Fuck you guys.
Yeah, my little CDs are just about a month old. They're just like little sprouts right now. I found a bunch of random seeds in one of the bags I ordered, so I thought, hey, why not try them out? I don't know, they might turn out to be all boys or all girls or all hermaphrodites, who knows, but maybe I can get some smokable weed out of it, so we're going to try it out.
One nugget of X plants would be really
especially
nice.
Since we didn't pay for them really. This came as a bonus in the bag. So, fuck yeah.
Can I have one?
I also have another bag of popcorn coming, and the popcorn always has seeds, so I'll give you some seeds. Yeah.
Oh, beautiful. Now that I've got some experience under my belt, having never kept a plant alive, much less cannabis, that is probably why it's very much like a weed, is because it can suffer through Richard Bigley's green thumb, or rather lack thereof. It's like a black thumb,
Mr. Sagebury would love to have a seed
no
as
problem.
well.
Yeah, I'll say, me and my roommate, when we're done smoking through the bag, usually we're pretty good at catching seeds before we grind them, so we'll collect some. So, just to end up the episode, I'll just go through some misconceptions. So, number one misconception, stoners are lazy. So, there's been a few studies. The biggest one is a 2015 study, showed that equal productivity between cannabis users and non-users. So, they tracked both daily cannabis users and people who were non-users and became users over the study period. And they found no significant drop in productivity between the users and the non-users. And they found no drop in productivity from the people who didn't use marijuana and then began to use marijuana. Yeah, so really the conception that stoners are lazy as a subgroup really just doesn't bore out in the evidence. Overdosing. You can't overdose on weed. Scientists tried their fucking damnedest in the 70s to get monkeys to overdose on weed. I don't know if anybody out there people out there probably knows what a dab is. A dab is a very concentrated form of cannabis. It's been processed into this kind of almost earwax-like substance, and just a little fleck of it is enough to get you high. Just like a little quarter of your pinky nail sized bit of it is enough to get you high. And they have monkeys in the 70s hooked up to these ventilators that make sure they're just breathing in this pure smoke. And they're feeding them these baseball-sized balls of concentrate to try and overdose them. And they couldn't overdose these monkeys. the worst they could do is get the monkeys high for days at a time, and the monkeys would suffer brain damage. But they could never get a monkey to die from overdose of marijuana. Holding it hidden. So this is another misconception. So people hear that to get high, you should hold your hits in. And it's partially true. They studied the smoke going into lungs and then coming out of lungs to see what chemicals it lost, what chemicals it gained, etc. And really, anything past 4 seconds doesn't absorb any more THC. So if you hold your smoke in for more than 4 seconds, really you're just punishing yourself because your lungs literally aren't capable usually of absorbing any more THC past holding it in for 4 seconds. Gateway drug. So during the second wave of the war on drugs, many negative myths about cannabis were pushed as propaganda. Framing marijuana as a gateway drug was a popular argument against its use, because there was a real lack of evidence that cannabis did anything really harmful or long-lasting. So brandishing marijuana as a gateway drug, that it's not dangerous, but it can lead to something dangerous, was a popular rhetoric trick of anybody doing the anti-drug or the drug war thing in the early 1970s and all the way up to today. But correlation does not equal causation. The willingness to try drugs means that those who go on to try other hard drugs after cannabis may have tried drugs even if cannabis wasn't available to them at the time. So just because somebody tries cannabis and a hard drug doesn't mean that cannabis led to the hard drug. And the small percentage of hard drug users compared to the huge percentage of the population that uses cannabis and cannabis product is kind of a claim that cannabis is not a gateway drug. You would see a lot more people becoming addicted if this huge swath of the population are regular cannabis users and don't go on. I guess lastly, just to leave out strain names. Strain names don't mean much. Sativa and indica don't mean much either. Maybe 20 years ago, when not so much interbreeding took place, they meant a bit more, but today the amount of breeding and inbreeding and like poor records being kept as breeding happens, that it's happened in the marijuana market, means that strains are very inconsistent, as it were. Like, you can't depend on every place selling Trainwreck to have results that feel like Trainwreck, because there's no real consistency in records for what strain is. You kind of have to find a place that sells the stuff and hope that your body likes it, and then hope that that place keeps on selling that same strain, or, you know, just be adventuring about trying new ones as they come along. You know, trust in your gut, do what feels good, smoke along, and, you know, just don't put too much stress in the strain name or buying the perfect strain. Just see what works for you. Experiment a little bit. Alrighty, that's it for me. Anybody else got any closing thoughts?
Smoke weed every day.
Or don't, you know, whatever.
And like I said, like you don't have to smoke along to participate in this podcast. You can choose to if you want. We don't want to pressure anybody to do anything. But, you know, if you want to, feel free.
Well, like I've talked about, like I don't smoke it like at all, barely. But my husband smokes it every day.
I live with two roommates that smoke like prodigious amounts of pot, and I had 4 tiny little joints that lasted me until one of my roommates smoked them. So don't have to do pot to be cool, but doing pot is also cool.
Yeah, up you go. Do whatever makes you feel good.
From Occultae Veritatis, I'm Mood Gallifrey.
And
in remote
Richard
studio
Bigley.
Also. Thank you. Have a good night.
Totalis.
Toke up. Hang 10.
Love you, bye.
Yeah.
Leave your cookies and weed out for Snoop Dogg.
Bye-bye. All the way back from 1914, here is Billy Murray with his song, When You're All Dressed Up and No Place to Go. Enjoy and see you in the after show.
When
the lights shine bright o'er the town at night, and it's laughter, wine, and song. Life is one delight if you stand in right, but it's fierce when you stand in wrong. Though your soul may cry for the life called high, and your coin you would gladly blow, 'tis a bitter cup to be all dressed up when you've no place at all to go. When you're all dressed up and no place to go, life seems weary, dreary, and slow. My heart has ached and bled for the tears I've shed when I'd no place to go unless I went back to bed. I've had a sad, sad life, and whenever I go to that peaceful spot where the violets grow upon a nice white stone, will be written below, he was all dressed up, but no place to go. Once a friend of mine gave me one swell time that I shall not soon forget. The excitement he handed out to me was a brand that you don't oft get. We went through Grand Tomb in the afternoon, which was pleasure enough alone. Then we went to call on his Uncle Paul, who was sick in the soldier's home. When you're all dressed up and no place to go, life seems weary, dreary, and slow. My heart has ached and bled for the tears I've shed when I'd no place to go unless I went back to bed. I've had a sad, sad life, and whenever I go to that peaceful spot where the violets grow upon a nice white stone, will be written below, he was all dressed up, but no place to go.
Hello and welcome back to the after show. Let's welcome some new members of the Cult of Valhalla. And if you would like to join the Cult of Valhalla, for as little as $1 a month, just go to patreon.com/ovpod. Bonus content, the ability to vote on future episodes, and an exclusive fan community on Discord could all be yours. For $6.66 a month, thank you for pledging Bridget O'Rourke. Pledging $6.66 per month. At the Occultist Edgelord level, we welcome Christina Weber to the Cult of Valhalla. For pledging $1 a month, we thank you very much, Alexis Kaplinger. Thank you for joining the Cult of Valhalla. For $6.66 a month pledged, we welcome Corey Waddell. Thank you for coming into the Cult of Valhalla. And lastly, for $5 a month, Stephen Skytower. I could have sworn you were a patron before. Who knows? But it's good to see a familiar face in the cult. Welcome, Stephen. Welcome to the Cult of Valhalla. Thank you all for listening. If you'd like to have your name read and all the other things that I mentioned before, just go to patreon.com/ovpod. Have a good night, and break out that pampering equipment that you've been saving. You know, the exfoliating mask, the special bath bomb for a special night. It's been a long, hard event with this pandemic. Treat yourself. Have a wonderful evening.